Introduce it. Good morning. This is Dr. Dory Barnett, and this is the first in one of four series on inclusive behavior education. And today's topic is restorative classroom practices. And this is sponsored through the Cal State University Fullerton Center for Creativity and Critical Thinking. And I believe that school's first provided grant funds for this program. So we're very grateful to them as well. And I'm grateful. Do you mind if I say your name while we're recording? Is that okay if I say your name? Okay, so I'm grateful we have an attendee that we're going to be discussing some things, and then other people can listen and contact me if they have any questions. So the goals, having a little trouble. Okay, the goals for today's presentation is really to give an overview of restorative classroom practices. And I know that people come to this approach or topic of restorative practice with different backgrounds. Um, I'm imagining if you have an interest in restorative practice and you're here today, that you probably um, use a restorative approach and maybe have some experiences with some of the actual practices. So what we're going to do today is explore some of the foundational principles of restorative practice, including what's called the restorative hypothesis and the aim of restorative practice. We're going to take a look at the social discipline window, which helps us locate our current approach within the continuum of restorative practice. And then we're actually going to introduce and practice some of the basic strategies. And these include effective statements, restorative questions, and restorative conversations. And lastly, we will review how we can use community circles within schools and classrooms. Anything else anyone has a burning desire to discuss or add? Okay. All right. So restorative practices, there's many descriptions of restorative practice, but this is one that I like from the Center for Restorative Practice and also the IIRP, which is the International Institute of Restorative Practice. Restorative practice are a framework. It's not just one thing, it's not a curriculum, but actually an approach or a framework for building community and responding to challenging behavior through authentic dialogue, coming to understanding, and making things right. This little slide is a cartoon, and the teacher's saying to, let's call him Timmy, "Where is everyone?" And he said they were expelled. So about 10 years ago, I can tell you there was a lot of statistics that showed in California, particularly, the rate of suspensions and expulsions, primarily suspensions, had risen in some school district as much as 25%. So that was computed by taking all of the incidences of suspension, which is considered an exclusive discipline because you're removing students from the classroom. And if you divided those number of suspensions up with the total number of students, by the total number of students in the school, some schools were as high as 25%. And that's just not right, because when students are suspended or expelled, they're removed from instruction, and that actually makes the gap between achievement even bigger. So restorative practices are considered one of the evidence-based practices, including social emotional learning, PBIS, positive behavior supports, and restorative practice are considered one of the positive responses to deal with problem behavior in schools that the California Department of Education required as law starting about 5 to 7 years ago, because there was a need to address this growing number of students just being removed from the classroom and not really addressing their problem behavior. So restorative practices keep students in school learning rather than removing them through exclusive discipline, which means taking the student out of the classroom. Another thing I want to say about restorative practice approach before we get into some of the practices, you might have heard the term restorative justice. So restorative practices are inspired and certainly stem from the philosophy and practice of restorative justice. But restorative justice actually is a term that is used within the correctional or prison system, and it refers to an actual decision-making process where within the Justice Department. So in schools, we like to use the term practice. It's an approach, it's a practice, restorative practice, but it does draw from restorative justice principles or philosophy, which puts repairing harm done to relationships and people over and above the practice of assigning blame and dispensing punishment. So that's sort of the paradigm shift. Instead of looking at who's to blame and what we're going to do to that person, restorative practice looks at how are we going to repair the harm done to relationships and community, and how are we going to make things right. So in schools, we like to refer to this as restorative practice. Some of the benefits that have been shown of implementing a restorative approach in schools is to build healthy relationships between students and educators. Um, Schools that have implemented restorative practice along with social emotional learning and positive behavior supports have seen a large reduction in problem behavior, reduction in office discipline referrals, and suspensions and expulsions. More importantly, a restorative approach has been shown to improve school culture and climate by repairing harm and restoring positive relationships. And it's also a way to reduce the number of conflicts and hold students responsible. I should mention before we go on, I'm sorry, I didn't really introduce myself. So my involvement with restorative practice started when I'm currently retired and I teach right now, and I'm a part-time school psychologist, but I was the coordinator for PBIS at Orange County Department of Education. In fact, that's how I met Dr. Carmona. She was my counterpart in San Bernardino County when we both did the same thing. And so at the county, I was trained through the International Institute of Restorative Practice in this approach, so that the counties were finding that if we could train teachers along with PBIS and along with social emotional learning in this approach, we could really make a dent in those exclusive discipline practices. So that is my training, and I'm currently a certified trainer of restorative practice with the International Institute of Restorative Practices. And that's sort of the approach that we're going to be talking about in this session. So the restorative hypothesis was a statement that was developed by Ted Wachtell, who was the founder of the IIRP. He's currently called an emeritus because he is retired as well. And this sort of gets at the gist of the meaning of restorative practice. And it says, the hypothesis states that human beings are happier, more productive, and more likely to make positive changes in their behavior when those in positions of authority do things with them rather than to or for them. So if we substitute human beings with students, and we substitute people in authority with teachers or educators, then we can repeat this and we can say students are happier, more productive, and more likely to make positive changes in their behavior when those in positions of when teachers and educators do things with them rather than to or for them. And we'll sort of see how this plays out as we move through our discussion today and some of the practices. But keep in mind, a restorative approach is doing things with students rather than to or for them, which leads us to something called the social discipline window. I'm going to go back one slide. Um, So if you're watching this, I'm going to ask if you just take a moment and think about a person. It can be a teacher or counselor that you had when you were in school, or just someone in your youth that made a positive impact on you. Okay. So if you'll get that person in mind, you might want to visualize that person. I'm visualizing my person right now, and think about what were they like? What were some of the characteristics that really contributed to that positive impact? Okay. So I'm thinking of Miss Fanny Daly. She was my dance teacher in at Millikan High School in Long Beach. And her characteristics, she was just very kind. She had really high expectations and she just believed in me. And those are some of the characteristics. So you might share what were some of your adults' characteristics. Um, some people, when I do this in group trainings, do say like the person believed in them. Um, they had positive regard. They accepted them no matter what. They had positive expectations. They believed they were going to accomplish something. And then a
Actually,
second, go ahead.
I had an English teacher when I arrived to United States. Her name is Brenda Barron. She was teaching in Irvine Valley College. I was studying English very long time. I couldn't accomplish, and I took her class. We correct one essay like 19 times. It until end of the semester. It was very long assignment. We were reading book, making some comments and stuff. It was kind of project. I got A from that class, and she kept encouraging us. And I said, you know what? If I pass this class, I can finish college here. She totally changed my life. And there were two other students. Everybody dropped her class almost. Two other students, they were also affected her so much. One of the young men, he was very much had trouble. He had so many trouble in his school. She brought him back to the community, and I was so much impressed with her attitude.
That is perfect. Thank you so
Instead
much.
of like giving low grade, and she always encourage, and he probably he's very successful right now
So
also.
what I'm hearing you, Salihan, thank you so much for sharing that wonderful educator. She stood by you no matter what. It sounds like she did not give up. She was not going to give up. But it sounds like she also had very high standards because I hear you saying other people dropped out. But she believed in you, but she also didn't want didn't ever lessen her expectation. She knew you could do it with encouragement,
Yeah,
and it pushed you to be a better person.
yeah, yeah.
Thank
I'm
you
so
so much for
thankful.
sharing that
Yeah,
wonderful educator.
yeah.
I have a follow-up question. So, and I think this might relate to the other gentleman you're talking about. So, when someone made a mistake in that class or maybe didn't perform as well as they could, how did this teacher respond?
She was very forgiving. She was always having positive attitude, even though we were like disappointed, and she was always in positive attitude. If we mention something negative, she was always bringing something positive.
So she
She was like
remained positive.
energizing you always.
She didn't, she remained positive. She kept her belief in you as
Yeah,
a good person.
always. Yeah.
So keep this person in mind, and thank you so much for sharing that. It was wonderful. As we look at something, this is a really powerful framework. It's called the social discipline window, and it helps us sort of frame where we are in our journey to becoming a restorative educator. So I'm going to quickly walk us through it, but keep in mind your educator. I'm going to start with, so this the window is created, as you can see, from the intersection of two axes. And the first axis, the horizontal one, they're both from low to high, talks about a continuum of encouragement, or support. So on this axis, if you're very high, this is a person or an educator who is always nurturing, always caring, loving, supportive, um, you know, really wants to help. So that is one continuum. Then the vertical axis from low to high is a continuum that describes control. So a person on this axis is someone who has very high expectations, clear boundaries, knows the limits. It's sort of a strong disciplinarian. When you combine these two axes, support and control, you get four quadrants. And I'm going to briefly describe each of them. So at the bottom right, an educator who is very high on the support, but low on control is what we call a permissive educator. They do things for students. They're supportive and nurturing and caring, which is great, but they lack that the limits, the boundaries, the control, um, the expectation setting. So, for instance, the downfall of someone who has all these positive, nurturing characteristics, when somebody goes off track, they just say, "Okay, well, I guess that's how you are." They don't have that belief in you, like you talked about. You can do better. I know this is a bad day, but I believe in you. I believe you can graduate. I believe you can do this work, and I'm going to hold you to it, and I'm going to support you to get there. So we don't want to be just permissive. We don't want to just do things for students and give them support without also giving them controls and limits. So the alternate um, person is someone who's very high in control, but lacks that caring, nurturing, and support. I'm thinking of a long time ago when I was doing my student teaching. I had a person who was in this two box. His name was Gerald Pomeroy, and he just he just didn't get students. He had his room was very structured. He knew his subject matter. He knew his content. But all he had was discipline and control. And it just, some of that was good because it was very structured and rigid and, um, the work was planned, but he didn't have that just soft side, the caring. So what we want is to be in the upper Oh, I'm going to talk first. The lower left hand, there are some teachers, hopefully few and far between, that have neither the caring, nurturing, or the control, and we call them just burnt out or not. Those are neglectful teachers. They often have something personally going on where they probably are not in their good health right now, and probably shouldn't be in the classroom. Where we want to strive to be in the upper right-hand corner, this quadrant is the with box, going back to that restorative hypothesis. This educator is caring, encouraging with students, believes in them, says you can do it. Here are the resources, here's the support, but they also have limits. They also have control. They're not going to just let students run wild and do whatever they want. They're going to say, hey, I believe in you, but I'm also going to set limits, and I expect you to complete these requirements so that we can keep up with the class, and you can get a good grade and you can graduate. So we want to be in the restorative box where we are high on our support and caring, and concern, but we also, along with that belief in students, we have expectations, we have limits, and we set boundaries and control. And that is what it means to do things with students rather than to them or for them. So going back and thinking of your ideal teacher, where would you, that's sort of the next little exercise, where, Saliha, if you don't mind, which quadrant would your teacher fall in?
She was totally encouraging and caring person, and she also had some structure, but she was kind of bringing us to that point by encouragement.
So from what
She
you
was restorative, of
She
course.
was restorative. I totally agree. I think it was a beautiful example. In fact, I may use that in the future trainings because she believed in you. But then when, like you were saying, the young man, I think you were saying he didn't come or he just was ready to give up. And she's like, no, you're going, these are the limits. These are what you need to do. You need to come back tomorrow with your work, and I'll be here with you, but you're going to make it, rather than saying, oh, you poor student, you can't, you've got too much going on. I don't think you can do this.
Yeah, she was.
So thank you for that. And we're all on the process or the path to becoming more restorative. I know there are times for me where I just want to be permissive and let things go. And sometimes that's appropriate if a student's in a crisis. You're going to be more caring. And then there's some students I want to be more controlling with because I feel like they need that structure. But it's a path to restorative. So, with that being said, the aim of restorative practice is to develop community and manage conflict and tensions by repairing harm and building relationships. So, it's sort of this yin yang of support and along with control. And from that comes, when we talk about restorative practices, we usually describe them along a continuum. A continuum means sort of low to high. In this continuum of restorative practices, we're describing the practices from the informal to the formal. So informal practices means those that we can go back to our schools or our settings and just do tomorrow, or even in our families with our partners. Informal restorative practices are very simple. They don't take much time. You can just do them on the spur of the moment. You don't need to organize anything or a meeting. And we're going to learn about those. So examples of informal restorative practices that we're going to review today would be effective statements and effective or restorative questions, which we can just do tomorrow or Monday when we go back to our settings. And then a little bit farther along the continuum, a small, in the middle is something called a small impromptu conference or a restorative dialogue, where we build upon our effective statements and restorative questions to actually manage conflict informally. And then more formal practices, those require more planning, a little more time and resources. That might be well, our community circles would actually go in the middle, but a more formal circle, like a harm circle, which is a restorative practice or conference where we actually go through a structured script to manage conflict and come up with a restorative solution. That can be done in a harm circle or a formal conference. But those actually, um, thinking of a tier 3 and MTSS, those take more time, resources, and planning. So we want to spend most of our time in the prevention, in the informal practices. And that's what we're going to review today and even practice. Our time, we're good for time. All right, so at the far end of the continuum back here, the easiest restorative practice to do, we're going to learn today, is called effective statements. And those of you, if you have a counseling background, they're sometimes called I statements. An effective statement is a way to communicate how another person's behavior affected you, either positively or negatively. But when we communicate using effective statements, we tend to build relationships and trust rather than push students away or people away. Um, because so often when somebody says something that harms us, the wrong way to respond is we usually say something like, um, you know, oh, you don't know what you're talking about, or you're always late, or you're always disrespectful. That pushes people away. It doesn't build relationships. So we want to be able to communicate about other person's behavior, especially when they've caused harm, um, in an effective way. So effective statements are considered the most informal side of the restorative continuum. They're the core to all restorative practices, and they give us a way to express feelings that are both positive and negative. Um, by doing this, we can build empathy and learn social emotional learning skills. So there's the overlap between restorative practices and social emotional learning. So let's practice. Oh, here's some examples first, and then we'll practice. So this has happened to me a lot. So say I'm teaching a class, or you're giving a presentation, or leading something at your work or with students, and people are just not listening. So rather than putting the other, students down or saying, something like, be quiet, listen, we want to share how we're feeling. So I might stop and say, I worked really hard to prepare this lesson. And I feel frustrated, or I feel disrespected when the class is not listening or following my instructions. And that, if you think about it, sort of makes students like, take a step back and say, wow, she's a person, she feels something. I'm going to pay attention. As opposed to if I said, stop talking, that pushes the person away. We can also use effective statements to recognize positive behavior. So when students put a lot of effort and they accomplish something that they've been working hard, instead of just saying, "Oh, you got an A," might want to share your feelings. So an effective statement would say, "I feel proud when is because I see you doing your best work." Or I just feel really joyful that everyone completed their work and worked so hard on this project. So, some practice here. Um, Saliha, would you be willing to practice with me?
Of
Think you're
course.
okay, thank you. So we're just going to go back and forth, and I encourage you, if you're listening to this at a later time, maybe you could practice. It's just a quick exercise to practice these affective statements. And just a little caveat, we want to really just say what your feeling is without saying, I feel that. When you say, I feel that, that's a thought, that's not a feeling. So we're just going to practice. So, Saliha, do you want me to start or would you like to start?
Sure. Please go ahead.
Okay, so I'm going to use number 3. I feel hopeful. I feel hopeful when students ask questions because I feel like they really want to learn. You pick, can you pick one?
Yeah. I feel glad when everybody attend classroom and answer my questions. I feel like you prepare.
You feel glad.
Yeah, I feel glad and you reflect that they have hard work.
Right. But
Yeah.
having what I feel when you say that, it makes me feel connected to you, that you feel glad that I prepared. It builds something. It
Yeah,
builds
yes.
a little relationship thread there
Yeah.
rather than if you just say, "Good work." Okay, let's each try one more. Um,
Um, maybe like I feel confident uh, when I see your project is in progress. If you give assignment, for example, they just share that, oh, they didn't finish, but they are in halfway, something like that. You
Absolutely.
kind of like encouraging them to continue and bring it as soon as possible, something like this.
But by hearing you say that you feel confident, it motivated me.
Yeah,
It just had a reaction.
yeah.
Thank you. So I'll try one more too. Um, I feel frustrated when um, I see students coming to late to class because it makes me feel like maybe that they're not bought in. So I feel frustrated when students are late to class because we can't get off on a good start, and um, we maybe have to go back and people are missing things.
Yeah,
So thank you so much for practicing and demonstrating those. You did a great job.
thanks.
This is a list of common statements that students report they typically hear from teachers. So just to practice a little bit further, um, how might we reword these as an affective statement? So I'm going to pick one. Um, or do you want to try one, Saliha?
Like instead of saying good job,
Yeah. How would you say I feel?
okay. For example, when my daughter get good grade from math test,
Yes, I
I
feel.
say, see your hard work pay off.
So
And
instead, I
I
feel.
felt that you put so much effort on it.
Let's try it one more way without saying I felt that. Your daughter, so using that same scenario, your daughter got a good grade on the math test. I feel.
I feel so proud.
Yes,
Is that okay? Oh,
yes,
okay.
yes.
More emotion, basically.
Yeah,
You
more,
okay?
it just
Okay.
literally builds the relationship.
Okay.
But that was a great example.
Mhm.
Thank you. Yeah, so just as a parent, this is something you can say, I feel proud of you for working so hard on that assignment and doing your best. I'm going to try one. Let's see. So again, instead of saying stop talking, that would be I can go back and say, I feel disrespected because I'm up here, I'm giving a lecture, I'm leading a class, and um, I need people to listen. I'm feeling frustrated with the talking right now. It just builds that little sense of connection. And I encourage, if you're listening or if you're here, some people have tried this is just something you can literally go home and try with your daughter, your partner, or in school on Monday and observe the difference in the response and see if it makes a difference. All right. So next, a restorative question. So this is building upon restorative um, statements, the effective statements. But again, there's this little paradigm shift. So in a typical adversarial approach to discipline or harmful behavior, we might ask, um, I was a counselor. I dealt with discipline in a high school locally, and we would tend to just take a cookbook hardline approach. So a student came in with a referral, we would say, okay, what rule was broken? Who's to blame? What did you do wrong? And here's your punishment. But in a restorative approach, we shift the paradigm. Instead of what rule was broken, we ask who was harmed by the behavior, what harm resulted, and most importantly, what can be done to make things right. So there's actually this little set of questions called restorative questions that we can ask. So I'm a school psychologist, so I might do this in a counseling situation. You can do these questions informally, with your family members, with students. You can do them with one student. You can do them with two students in a little scenario. So when challenging behavior occurs, and I'm going to give you an example. And I'll walk you through these questions. So about 2 weeks ago, I was at a school. I work locally, actually in the Fullerton School District, K through 8, so very locally. And two fifth and sixth grade students out on the playground got into a conflict, and it was a typical boy conflict. One of them accidentally, I think, threw the ball wrong and sort of hit one in the shoulder, and the other one just turned around and was so angry, and he said, "I wish you were dead." Really harmful thing to say. So he got reported, and the principal was trained in restorative practices, and she was kind enough to ask me to come in, and we met actually first with the first boy. So we asked him, instead of saying, what did you do, this is bad, you're going to get suspended, we asked these questions. What happened? What were you thinking about, at the time you said that you wanted to kill him or you wished he was dead? What have you thought about since? Who's been affected by what you've said? How have they been affected? And what needs to happen to make things right? So in the process of asking these questions, it turned out what happened was he felt like, even before this little incident happened, that this person had sort of been making fun of him. He felt like the person had made him look bad in front of his friends out there on the playground. So then this small little incident happened, and it just ticked him off. So what was he thinking about at the time? He wasn't planning to, kill the person, even though we had to go through that with him because he said, "I wish you were dead." He was just thinking, and he said this really well, he was just thinking, "I just wished at that time he wasn't there," because he felt hurt. And what he thought about since is that, in the process of asking these restorative questions, he actually realized that this is why he said what he did, that he didn't mean, he wanted to cause physical harm. He just wished, it hadn't happened. That's what he had thought about since. So when we asked him who had been affected, with a little bit of prompting, he realized that what he said sort of affected the other kids and maybe scared them because he said, I wish you were dead. And that in this day and age, could be a very scary thing with all the violence in schools. And it also affected the playground supervisor who became very anxious too. So he decided what he needed to do, and he agreed. You have to get the student to agree. If they really do want the other student to die, this is not appropriate at this point. But he was calm now, and he agreed that to make things right, um, he would agree to have a conference with the other student. So we called the other student in. Long story short, asked both of them these questions. They both felt bad. The other student was actually trying to use humor, not very well, to make the other. It was hard to explain, but when after he said, "I wish you were dead," the other student said, he was trying to make a joke, but it just made it worse. So as a result of having this little informal conference and asking these questions, um, they actually agreed to, you can't force kids to be friends, but they agreed to try and tolerate each other. They agreed they would have a little informal sign just between them when they saw each other on the playground in the next 3 days. They were just going to say, like, peace or cool. I forgot what their little sign was, because they agreed they weren't going to, they needed to stay away, but they were going to just acknowledge each other in a safe way. And it really turned out well. I was very happy about it.
They were just angry at that moment, probably.
Yeah, yeah, but it could have been, the kid said something, he could have been called in, been suspended for 2 days because he really did say, "I wish you were dead." Um, and it could have been, worse for everyone.
Yeah.
So it didn't need to be. So that's an example. I'm going through quickly right now, just in the interest of time, but an example how you can use those questions with two students. You can use them with a family member. Something simple as, maybe your daughter borrowed your best blouse and didn't take care of it. So, instead of saying, "You never take care of my things," or "You're careless," you could use an effective statement. "I feel really hurt that you know, my things were not cared for. I feel disrespected. I feel let down. I feel disappointed." And maybe you could even go through these questions. You can actually conversely also ask these questions, to recognize a good behavior, um, because we want to recognize it and get the student to think, well, how can they continue to do this? A positive thing like getting an A on a math test. All right. So, lastly, I'm just going to briefly run through community circles. So, um, a lot of us are in education settings, and you might have heard about the use of community circles, or you might be doing them already. But community circles is a way of building these trusting relationships, practicing some of these effective statements and questions. Because when people are sitting in a circle and everyone can see each other, it's equitable. Um, just experience and research has shown that when kids have this experience of being in a circle, they're very much less likely out on the playground to call each other names and bully each other because they've developed this sense of trust and relationship. And it's certainly not a counseling circle. A community circle can just be as simple as going around and using a talking piece. I use this little globe. It's from the IIRP, where the Institute of Restorative Practice. It just shows that restorative practices are worldwide. And the talking piece means that if I hold the talking piece, I am the one talking, everyone else is listening. It's sort of a tangible object that focuses students. It can be proprioceptive, so those kids with a lot of kinks and activity, when they're holding the circle, it actually just sort of focuses them and calms them down, and it encourages everyone to have a turn and equity. So I have a little, if you went to the link, there's a lot of resources. This is just one website called Collaborative Learning Solutions that will give you a lot of sentence starters for circles. But teachers have used circles just sometimes as a morning meeting, maybe on a Monday, and then again on a Friday. Monday to ground students or include students as they come back from the weekend, and just as a check-in to see how the weekend went, or to just sort of a temperature check where they are that day. And then maybe on a Friday, again, to ground them going into the weekend. That's one way. Some teachers use circles to prepare, like you're going on a field trip and you want to, go around and make sure everybody agrees on the rules, or talk about anything that might, concerns that might come up. So some teachers use circles for actually responding to curriculum. Maybe they're doing a history unit and they'll take a famous character, like Harriet Tubman, and talk about questions, just using the talking piece. It's a way, just an interesting way to talk about portions of a lesson. And then again, of course, you can use a circle as you get more training to resolve conflict. That would be called a harm circle. So just, it's a wonderful activity, and it really, spending even 3 minutes or 5 minutes in a circle can reduce tension, just have a grounding, and then students are ready to work. It can also just be a stand-up circle for a check-in, how are we doing? Just go around. What went well? Where is everybody on this assignment? Just a quick go round. What do you
And
need?
some shy students, they have feeling of inclusion because of they have voice over in the circle. Also, some kids have burning problems, so they will just keep inside, they will come out.
Excellent. So the
Yeah.
shy person, because everyone gets a turn, that
Yeah.
person, and there's some techniques. We don't have a lot of time for techniques, but to draw out that shy person, you can even use sort of those lifelines. Remember that question? If they, can't come up with a question, maybe you prime the pump, like maybe for your ice break, you list some possible responses, or do I've seen a circle icebreaker where instead of being totally open-ended, you give three choices. What's your favorite vacation? Tropical, mountain, or desert, like that, so
Mhm.
that anyone can answer.
Yeah, yeah.
And like you said, also, it's a wonderful way for students to resolve a problem and bring it up to the group. So thank you so much for sharing that. We talked about the different types of circles, community circles, which if you're doing MTSS, multi-tiered systems of support, would mean tier 1. It's something that anyone can do. Response circle is more tier 2, to address a specific topic of concern. And then tier 3 are those restorative conferences where you're really bringing in a lot more resources. It's more highly structured, and you're resolving a particular harm or conflict and coming up with a resolution. All right. So, whoops. So, just a closing community circle. Saliha, will you do this with me? So, I will start based on our discussion of restorative classroom practices. Um, Please just pick one thing I was surprised by, I learned, or I realized. So I'm going to hand the circle to you. I mean, the talking piece to you.
Okay. Actually, I learned to um, repair harm and restoring positive relationship in this restorative practices. I wasn't thinking this could be organized. It was like instant, but it's pretty organized in your presentation. Thank you very much. And I realized the power of the positive attitude, you know, keeping positive attitude, but teachers need so much patience, I think, and the educators, right?
Right. And I'm going to respond also. I learned from you that the power of an educator to make a difference in a person's whole life based on the beautiful story you shared of your language teacher.
Yeah.
So that was a very powerful, I couldn't have asked for a better example of a restorative educator. So thank you so much. And I have a slide of some resources. There's quickly, just two books if you're interested in going further. These the Restorative Practices Handbook for Educators is a really great summary of all the practices we talked about today. And it has, several examples and sort of guides you through the restorative philosophy and basic practices. And then if you're interested in circles, similarly, this is a book of restorative circles in schools, a practical guide for educators. Some free things that can be downloaded online. You can see on this slide, the San Francisco Unified School District has a lot of free materials on restorative practices. They have a great circles guide. I think it's about 60 pages for free. You can download it, and it gives you all kinds of circle starters and sample circle lessons. There is, if you want to read more about the philosophy, this is a free article, Defining Restorative. I use that all the time. It goes through all of the practices, and it was written by Ted Wachtel. So you can download this for free. And it's also, these resources are also available at the IIRP website. So thank you so much for Saliha for participating. You were like the perfect person.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I learned a lot from you. Is that okay to have your email? Maybe I can reach you.
Yes, and I was just going to show people.
Okay.
Didn't I have the slide with? Oh, it's on this slide. Whoops. I do have a slide with my email. Whoops. So it's coming up, sorry. All right, so if you need to reach me, you're welcome. I'd love to hear from you or from anyone who's listening. There it is. I used my work email, so you can reach me here. You're welcome to text me, and then here's a little calendar. I hope you'll join us for the next session in the Inclusive Behavior Education series on Saturday, March 11th, and we're going to talk about trauma-sensitive classrooms. Then again on April 1st, we'll talk about Tier 1 PBIS class in the classroom. And April 29th, we're going to look at Tier 3, how to identify the function of problem behavior. All right, thank you so much.
Is it still recording?
Oh, let me turn it off. I will turn this off.
Actually, yeah.
Okay, it is stopped.